Certainly it's good to see everyone out this morning. I did a little painting yesterday, taking advantage of the snow. Painting on the inside, that is. And I'm a little stiff today, walking up and down stairs and climbing up and down a step ladder. I'm a little bit stiff today, but hopefully my mouth will still work. But we do invite you to be turning in your Bibles this morning to Acts chapter 17. And in just a moment, we'll be looking at some things in that chapter. And I also want to invite everyone to the gospel meeting at South Keystone on May the 20th through the 23rd. I have not decided all of the topics yet, but I'll make up my mind sometime between now and then. And also, we're having a lectureship in Daleville, Indiana. Daleville, Tipton, and Pendleton churches have come together for the last, I think this will be our 10th year of having a lectureship. It's only on a Saturday morning. It's at 9 o'clock to 12, and we have some lunch provided afterwards. And I think our theme this year is called Come Abide. So that's on April the 28th in Daleville, Indiana. So if you happen to be out that way, or you can make it that Saturday, then we would certainly encourage you to be with us that day. Acts chapter 17, I want us to back up and begin at verse 16. This particular passage, this particular lesson that the Apostle Paul brought to the individuals on that occasion, this is a passage to me that is the essence of what should be preached throughout the world, because so many people do not know God. They do not know who God is. Now, they know God by name, because oftentimes they say it in profanity, but they do not know God. And there are many religious people who believe that they know God, but they really do not know the God of the Bible. And there are people in various Middle East religions that talk about a God, Allah. They believe that it's this God, but they have a God in which they have ascribed to him characteristics that are not Jehovah God. And so when I think about this particular subject and the Apostle Paul on this day, and every verse, every word is there for a reason, and when I read and study a passage, I'm looking at it from different angles and from different perspectives. I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of Paul being the speaker, and I think about it from the standpoint of those that are hearing. I think about it from the standpoint of what they believed or what they were practicing. I think about it from the standpoint of what if I were there that day and I were in the audience and I could hear Paul understanding and believing the things that I do. What applications would I find in this particular lesson? But in verse 16 it says, "Now while Paul waited for them in Athens, his spirit was stirred in him when he saw the city wholly given to idolatry. Therefore disputed he in the synagogue with the Jews and with devout persons, and in the market daily with them that met with him. Then certain philosophers of the Epicureans and of the Stoics encountered him, and some said, What will this babbler say? Others some, He seemeth to be a setter forth of strange gods, because he preached unto them Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him unto Areopagus, saying, May we know what this new doctrine whereof thou speakest is. For thou bringest certain strange things to our ears. We would know therefore what these things mean. For all the Athenians and strangers were there to spend their time in nothing else but to either to tell or to hear some new thing. Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things ye are too superstitious. For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you. God that made the world and all things therein, see that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands, neither is worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things. And made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. For as much then as we are the offspring of God, ye ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold or silver or stone graven by art man's device. And the times of this ignorance God God winked at, but now commandeth all men everywhere to repent, because he hath appointed a day in the which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he hath ordained, whereof he hath given assurance unto all men, and that he hath raised him from the dead. And when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, and others said, We will hear thee again of this matter. So Paul departed from among them, howbeit certain inclave unto him, and believed, among the which was Dionysius, and Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with him. When Paul stood at Mars Hill, the Bible says his spirit was stirred within him. The city was wholly given to idolatry. There was an emotional reaction. There was a reaction of passion. There was an emotional reaction from Paul when he saw the spiritual condition of the city. Any city that does not know God, that has turned over their thought process, their lives to a false religion, to false gods, to idols, is a city that is deprived of salvation and deprived of the blessings that could come from God. Paul was no doubt used to going into places where there were those that were believers in God from the standpoint of Jews. They knew Jehovah God, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. But he entered now into a city in which the people were completely ignorant of Jehovah God. Sometimes we go into places like that. Sometimes we go into other countries and we conduct missions and evangelistic tours, and we go in those places and we find out that people are worshiping idols, or they are just not acquainted with the God of the Bible, and we begin basically at ground zero. And we begin in the beginning, in the book of Genesis, and we talk about God. We talk about all that God did and all created, and we start talking about who God is, and we talk about his character, and what he has done for man, and how important God is to us, and what our purpose is on this earth, and so forth. Well, Paul stood in a place in which they were very religious. He describes them in the King James as too superstitious. The American Standard says too religious. They had too many religions, they had too many gods, they had false gods, and that was one is too many, but they had a lot. And the Bible says he was emotionally stirred by what he saw because of the spiritual condition of the city, not because of what they did or did not have physically. He was not stirred because some were poor and some were rich. He was stirred because of the spiritual condition of the city. They were wholly given to idolatry. That is a bad thing. Therefore he disputed in the synagogue with Jews and with devout persons, and in the market daily with them that met with him. Paul was not ashamed, nor was he bashful about discussing and debating the truth. He was used to coming upon people who did not understand God or who did not know God, and certainly those that did not know who Christ was and is. But notice that certain philosophers of the Epicureans and of the Stoics encountered him. And notice what they said. Some say, what will this babbler say? Others, some, he seemeth to be a setter forth of strange gods. It shows how little they understood already about Paul. They called him a babbler. Wouldn't you just love to have a few minutes to be able to sit at the feet of the Apostle Paul and hear him preach? Wouldn't you love to be able to receive an inspired letter written by Paul, written to you, written to your family, written to this church? Wouldn't you love to be the recipient of the great blessings that would be attached to hearing this babble? But they mocked him, they derided him, they called him a babbler, much like they were accusing the apostles on the day of Pentecost in Acts 2. Then they began to make fun of what he said. And they misunderstood what he said. Strange gods. Just because they did not know Jesus Christ, and they did not understand him to be the second person of the Godhead, there's no reason to call him or any other of the Godhead strange gods, little g gods. They are not little g gods. They are the Godhead. They are Jehovah God, Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, God the Father. But this is their misunderstanding, their lack of understanding. Because he preached unto them Jesus and the resurrection. How important Jesus and his resurrection is. I will say one thing. they recognize the cornerstone of the gospel message. Without the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, there is no Christianity. They at least understood that. But notice then, they offered him an invitation. In verse 19, may we know what this new doctrine whereof thou speakest is. And sometimes the Bible gives us the motives of the person asking the question or the person in the audience. Oftentimes we read in the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John where the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, the lawyers, they came to Jesus and they would ask him a question, but it was always from an improper motive. The Bible would say, to catch him in his words. Or they came tempting him or trying him. And the Bible gives us their motives because in verse 21, all the Athenians and strangers which were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing. And by the way, they're not all dead yet. There are a lot of people who like to tell and hear some new thing, even in the church. Beware of people that are telling and wanting to hear some new thing. Because the Bible truth has been here for 2,000 years now, and there is nothing new that is to be said. Now, you might not know it, and you need to know it. But as far as some new thing, let's beware of those that bring in a new doctrine. A doctrine that's not found in the New Testament. But their motive was they wanted to hear some new thing. So, in verse 22, Paul begins his exposition to them. And it says, he stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things ye are too superstitious. Isn't it wonderful that Paul begins by criticizing them, by correcting their thinking, by pointing exactly to what's wrong? He doesn't give a lot of flattering words. He doesn't try to make them feel comfortable in their religion. He does not want them to feel good about their various religions. He states at the very outset they are too religious, they are too superstitious. You're involved in idolatry. And he gives the reason why in verse 23. For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, your idols, I found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you. Now I've read commentaries in which what is often stated is that these people in this city would have this one idol set aside as the unknown God in case they left one out. Now we go back to the Old Testament, we can look at some of those idols. The Philistines had Dagon. The Canaanites had Baal and Ashtaroth. There was Chemosh and Molech of the Moabites and the Ammonites. A lot of false gods during the time of Israelite occupation of the land of Palestine. The Bible tells us in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 1, God said, you drive those people out of the land. Because if you do not, they will become a curse to you. Why? Because of their religions, because of their idolatry. If you allow the people to remain, their religion remains. Their religion was idols. They were serving idols. So what happened? The Israelites drove the enemies out of some of the land, but they did not drive them all out. By the time Israel is a great united kingdom, we find that when Solomon dies and his son Rehoboam takes over, there's another king that comes, Jeroboam, who takes the northern tribes away, and Rehoboam is left with the southern tribe. The northern tribes go off into idolatry. They worship Baal and Ashtaroth. Eventually they'll be carried away into Assyrian captivity because of their idolatry. And the prophets warned Judah, unless you repent, the same thing will happen to you. And about 150 years later, the southern tribe is carried away to Babylonian captivity because they too have fallen to the idols. There's a warning given. The people remain, they bring their idols, the idols have an influence, you will forsake God, you will serve idols, and that's exactly what happened to Israel. Eventually a remnant would be allowed to return to Jerusalem, and they would restore the Old Testament worship so that Jesus Christ could come. In the fullness of time, we're told in Galatians 4:4, Jesus would be born of a woman, and now it is this Jesus to whom the Apostle Paul would declare that he would give the crux of his sermon around the Godhead, and then before he can even get to the resurrection, they're tired of hearing about what Paul says. But Paul says, to the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly assembled together, ignorantly worshiping God. They're worshiping Him in the wrong way. Many of them will have instruments of music up here on their podium, and they will be trying to worship God in music by the use of these instruments. There'll be choruses and choirs that will stand up and sing, and they'll be performing, and they think that's worshiping God. That's ignorantly worshiping God. They are worshiping God in vain when they do that. A person doesn't have to be in the camp of not knowing who God is to ignorantly worship Him. There are some people who claim to know who God is, but they still ignorantly worship Him. These are people that do not know God. They are trying to worship a God that they do not know. If you do not know a God, how can you worship Him? Do you know His mind? If He's unknown, how is His mind revealed to you? How can you know His ways? And by the way, if you turn and look, and this is always a great passage to go to whenever we're talking about idols, but turn for a moment over to Psalm 115. I actually find this passage to be a little bit amusing. In Psalm 115, the psalmist talks about these idols. And he describes them for us, beginning in verse 4. He says, "Their idols are silver and gold, the work of men's hands. They have mouths, but they speak not. Eyes have they, but they see not. They have ears, but they hear not. Noses have they, but they smell not. They have hands, but they handle not. Feet have they, but they walk not. Neither speak they through their throat." Isn't it amazing? Man has come along, made idols, given him human, sometimes animal characteristics, make him look like a man of some kind. They give him eyes, he can't see. Give him ears, he can't hear. Give him mouth, he can't talk. Can't do anything. Gave him hands, that idol doesn't do anything. You go back to 1 Kings chapter 18 and you find that great conflict between Elijah and the prophets of Baal. And they prepared the altar, and they poured water all around. Elijah did with his. And they prepared that altar. Let's call upon our God and have our God consume the altar. And we all know the story. The prophets of Baal, they cried and wailed and moaned, and Elijah made fun of them. Maybe he can't hear you. Well, of course, he's got ears, but he can't hear. Well, maybe he's off on a far journey. Maybe he's asleep. Well, the fact is, he's not real. He was a figment of someone's imagination. And they gave him physical attributes. But as a God, he can do nothing. Why not? Because he's just made of rock or stone. But not so with Jehovah God. But anyway, continuing on in Psalm 115. They that make them are likened to them. So is everyone that trusted in them. O Israel, trust thou in the Lord. He is their help and their shield. Notice the contrast. When Elijah called upon Jehovah God, he did not have to scream and shout. He did not have to call upon him many, many, many times. He did not have to wait for Jehovah God to wake up. He did not have to wait for Jehovah God to come back from the journey. He cried out unto God, and fire came from heaven and consumed the altar and the offering and just licked up all the water that was in the trench around him. Jehovah God is not made, is not seen as an object, as an image. We're not supposed to make an image unto God. That's part of the Ten Commandments. We're not supposed to make some kind of artistic imagery from some rock or stone or wood and give him certain characteristics, because God's a spirit. John 4:24 says, God is a spirit, they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. But yet he still can see. He still hears. He still goes. He still does. Because he's real. He's a spirit, but he's real. But he's unknown to these people. So what Paul does, beginning in verse 24, is he begins to identify him. He begins to describe him in regards to who he is. Verse 24, he's creator. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, in Genesis 1:1. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made, in John 1:1-3. The Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, we read in Genesis 1:2. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. The spoken word, Jehovah God speaks things into existence. He is the creator. In Genesis 2:7, and God formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Who did that? None of those other gods. Jehovah See, these people are trying to restrict God. God cannot be restricted. Remember the exchange between Job and God? It's a little bit amusing, too, when you read through that. God, Job, where were you? Where were you when I formed the seasons? Where were you when I formed the oceans and the boundaries of the oceans and made the tides? Where were you? God did that, not Job. Job had nothing to do with it. That's why I make so much fun of people who think that humans have control of the earth in this global warming hoax or this climate change hoax. Who is man? Who is man to think that he can have power over the world, over the earth? Come on. That's giving a little bit too much credence to man, isn't it? The world does not evolve around man. The world evolves around God. God created it. He is the Lord and Master of the universe. Look at verse 25. He is to be the object of our worship. Neither is worship with man's hands as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth all life and breath and all things. God deserves our worship. In John 4:24 again, he's a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. But he cannot be worshipped in the way that man worships another man, or in a way that man worships an idol. Now think about these religions. Think about these idols. Every one of them made up by someone. Every one of them made up by some man. It was some man's imagination that put a design of what that God ought to look like. Someone took something in hand and sketched out what they thought that God ought to look like. And they took a stone and they began to carve, or they took some wood and they began to carve, and they made those characteristics, and they turned that into a god, a little g god, an idol. And they set that up on a shelf somewhere, on a table. And they began to fall down and worship that. And some man devised how that idol ought to be worshipped. Some man made the rules on how to worship that God. That God did not tell them. That God can't talk. He's not real. Some man did that. Some man then built a religion around that God and started making requirements and ordinances and commandments for that God. Not the God. A man did that. They made that religion. And then they multiplied it. I don't like that God. Let me make another God. So they made another God over here, calling by a different name, and they have different rules of worship, and different rules of following that God, and different rules of sacrifice, and different rules of religious days, and different ceremonies, and all these things they put together. Who did that? A man did that. Not the God. The God is not real. The God can't talk. God can't see. God can't communicate. Those little G gods are nothing. But man made those up. Isn't it amazing how many people followed those gods when man made them up? Don't you find that just perplexing? You mean some man took a piece of paper, some man took a birch stick or something, started sketching out what they think that'll look like, maybe they drew the sand. Here's what we think God will look like. And some men got together, they thought about the religion, about that idol. Let's make up these rules, let's require this, we ought to dress this way, we ought to do this, we ought to do that, and that's our religion. We're going to meet so many times a year, we're going to have so many ceremonies, we're going to do certain things. Man did all that. And all these people began to follow. From generation to generation, they all began to follow. They all began to fall down before that idol. An idol who had no power. An idol who could not talk or communicate. An idol who was nothing. Just a lump of stone. And thousands and generation after generation followed that false religion. How do people do that? How do people do that? They give no thought as to what they believe or why they believe it. They just do what they're told. And they're following a stick. Paul says, we're not talking about a stick. We're not talking about a rock. We're talking about the true God who created everything and who deserves our worship because he created everything. Look, he's not only a creator, he's not only the object of worship, but in verse 26, he's the author of peace. He's He's the author of peace. And hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the time before appointed in the bounds of their habitation. Can I talk a little bit about the blood of people? Man came along and divided everybody by the color of their skin. God made us all of one blood. One blood. You know why? God wants us united. We can all be believers in God, followers of Christ, Christians. Not based upon our gender, and not based upon our race or ethnicity, but based upon the fact that we are all one. Creatures created in the image of God, in Genesis 1, 26 and 27, of the same blood. The FBI will tell you that there is a difference between human blood and animal blood. There can be a crime scene, and there can be all kinds of blood on that crime scene. But they can tell you if some of that blood is human or if it's animal or otherwise. They can tell you that. Human blood is one kind. Animal blood is another kind. We're sophisticated enough we can know. Even if it's all red, we all know what kind of blood is what. We've got DNA tests now. We can even tell by blood. We can get it right down to basically the fingerprint of a person. And we can figure out by the blood who that is if we have that DNA on file. We're sophisticated. We are that sophisticated. But we have blood transfusions today. And we put blood in people. You know, at one time they thought the key was to a blood letting. Oh, well, a person's sick, we need to release the blood. And they were literally killing people by doing that. Come to find out what they need to do was give them blood. So they gave them blood. Guess what? Doesn't matter about the color of your skin, it's still red blood. Try to match up the type, right? Type's the second. Type varies all across all that blood, because God made of one blood all nations. God did that. God is the one who looks at human beings as human beings. There are not some human beings that are subhuman beings. They're all human beings. They're all equal in the sight of God. They're all created by Him. Therefore, we are all accountable unto God. In verse 27, they should seek the Lord, and haply they might feel after Him and find Him, though He be not far from every one of us. And then look at verse 28. He is our sustainer. He's our object of worship. He's our creator. He's the author of peace. He is our sustainer. For in Him we live and move and have our being. One of my favorite passages is in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3, when it says, He upholds all things by the word of His power. Man says Atlas is holding the world on His shoulders. Paul said that God upholds all things by the word of His power. His word was not only strong enough to create things, but to sustain things. The laws of nature that He put in force. We do not float in the air, because God created us, and with creating us, He created gravity to keep our feet on the ground. He sustains us. He keeps us going. In Him we live and move and have our being. For we are also His offspring. For as much then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold or silver stone, graven by art and man's device. Getting back again to this unknown God cannot be represented by an image made up by some man like all the others. Man made that up. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, 9 through 14 tells us that God revealed His mind unto us by inspiration. We have this book. Not from the imagination of man, but from the mind of God, given to men to write down. But this is the mind of God. Unlike the idol, who is made of stone that never communicates. That stone may have hands, but he can't write. And that stone may have a mouth, but he can't speak to us. But this God that is real has given us a real communication, written down by men by inspiration, not from the imagination of men, but from the mind of God. Therefore, ones. We know what our responsibilities are. We know how to glorify Him because God has revealed those things to us. We know how to be saved. We know how to stay saved because God has revealed that to us. We know how to worship Him. We know how to serve Him. We know how to organize. We know what to be called because God has revealed His mind to us through His Word. That's not like these idols. He's not a little g God. He's a capital G God. And the times of this ignorance God winked at, but now commandeth all men everywhere to repent. Now, you can say what you want. When Paul said repent, he got a reaction from that crowd. What do you mean repent? We're happy the way we are. We'll do things the way we want to. We've been following these idols for hundreds and thousands of years. We're not going to follow after what you say. I know that because a preacher can say repent and people begin to shiver. They don't want to repent. So that gets down to the ego of a man, doesn't it? Well, repent means I'm wrong, and I can't be wrong. We've been doing this all our life. My mom and daddy taught me that. My grandma and grandpa taught me that. This has been our religion all of our life, all passed down all through our generation. Remember what I said earlier? All those idolaters that listen to what one man devised, the religion that one man put together, they've been following for thousands of years. And you and I sit there and shake our heads and say, how can anybody do that? But we all have family members who do the same thing. They follow religion because that's the way they've always done it. That's what their families always believe. Because they won't think for themselves. You want to know why our nation's the way it's going? Because nobody's thinking. Nobody's thinking for themselves. They're listening to whatever babble comes across, and they're following that. They're not thinking for themselves. This whole gun control thing over the weekend, all these children out there about gun control, makes me want to throw up. I'm going to tell you why. You take the defense of people away, and that is really an open door for error and for abuse. A man is in his home with his family, and 10 thugs come to the door. We've heard of home invasions, right? 10 thugs come to the door and knock it down. And friends, they're not there for any good reason. They break in the door, they come in, you and your family's at home. There's 10 thugs. Now, you might be the biggest man on the face of the earth, but you're no match for 10 thugs. Your wife and children might know karate, but they're no match for 10 thugs. But you know what equalizes it? A gun. A gun. I never hear that argument made. Never hear that argument made. Why are people so bent to take away our defenses? Because what other nations have done, what they have become. Godless nations. Communist nations. Godless nations. I say all that. People are just doing things blindly. The illustration here is just doing things blindly without reasoning and thinking anything through. They just blindly say, okay, that's what the masses are saying. Okay, that's what we'll do. And God is here saying, or Paul is here saying that you need to listen to the true and living God. You do not need to be sitting here listening to the false gods. And so he says, the times of this ignorance God winked at, but now commandeth all men everywhere to repent, because he hath appointed a day in the which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he hath ordained, whereof he hath given assurance unto all men, and that he hath raised him from the dead. This is the very crux of Christianity. You need to believe in the one that God raised from the dead. Paul, that's not a very long sermon. I've added a lot of commentary that Paul did not say. He said these in just a few verses, so he just got started good, right? If I read that, I'm probably in 2 minutes, I'm up to the point to where we are now, in 2 minutes. And they stop him. When he gets to the part about what they asked him about, they stop him. Have you ever wondered why? Why are you stopping him? He just got through his introduction. He declared the unknown God. Now he's getting to the part about Jesus and him resurrected, and they stopped him, and it says they mocked him and said, we will hear thee again on the matter. They the truth. Can you imagine that? You have a gospel meeting and you invite the preacher in, and he just gets into his first lesson, he gets to the introduction, and you close down the meeting. That's what they did. We're just going to close the meeting down now. You see, Paul said something they did not want to hear. It flew in the face of everything they believed. They were not sincere. They just wanted to hear some new thing. They just wanted to find out how broad-minded they were, how tolerant they were of all religions, other than this one. We don't care what idol. We have every idol represented up here. Look how marvelous we are. Oh, we're good people. We tolerate everything, but not Christianity. No, not Christianity. Does that sound familiar? Sounds like today. Sounds like today. We will put up with everything under the sun except Christianity. In verse 33, so Paul departed from among them. Now, I don't know about you, but in my New Testament, that's the last verse on that page. But that's not the last verse in the story, because there's a verse 34. Howbeit certain men clave unto him and believed. In spite of all the naysayers, and in spite of all the unbelief, there were some that believed. Can I tell you, that is the essence of preaching the gospel. There are far more people that refuse to believe, refuse to repent, refuse to be baptized. Far more of those. But there are some that will believe and obey. Those are the ones that we're trying to reach. When you read this story and you see Paul's passion and you hear his words and you look at the reaction, the motives of those that invited him, there's an untold story in verse 34. Despite the influence and the urging not to believe Paul, of mocking Paul and ridiculing Paul, and acting like he was some babbler. Okay, we gave him 2 minutes to talk. That's enough. They shut him down, and yet despite shutting him down, some people were convinced there has to be a God other than these false gods. And when Paul preached the true and living God, certain men clave unto him and believed. 3 are named, and others. When you come to the end of the gospel sermon, that's where we always end up. No matter how long the sermon is, no matter what the sermon is about, we come to the end of the sermon in which it is a decision time. To believe or not believe, to obey or not to obey. Do we believe in the God that Paul talked about, the one who is creator and sustainer and the object of our worship and the author of our peace? Do we believe in him? And do we believe in him enough to obey him? Not obey what other men say about him, but obey him. Obey his word. Obey his son. The one who died on the cross. The one who God raised from the dead. Because you see, our hope of the resurrection of the dead hinges upon his resurrection from the dead. One day we will hear his voice, and we will come forth from the grave, whether we've done good or bad. Just as God had the power to raise Jesus from the dead, so likewise God will raise us from the dead. We're told that ultimately the kingdom, the church, will be delivered up. And we need to be found in that church. We need to be in that kingdom so that we are delivered up, so that God can be all in all. Friend, if you're not a Christian, why not decide to become a New Testament Christian today? Through faith, repenting of sins, confessing Jesus' name, being immersed in water for the remission of sins, to become a New Testament Christian, to be added to the Lord's church, to become a faithful servant of God, to follow him, to serve him, to worship him, to be an asset to the church. Church needs helpers. Church needs servants. The church needs you. If you're a wayward child of God, come back to God. God will forgive. He will abundantly pardon. God needs you as helpers and workers and servants and worshipers in the kingdom. come back to God. Will you please stop while we say this?